Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we continue our reading of Meditation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. We deeply value your support. Please like and share this audiobook to reach a wider audience, allowing more people to benefit from its wisdom. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, ensuring you receive immediate notifications as we upload new content. Together, we can spread the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, fostering a community of enlightenment and inner peace. Thank you for being part of our journey to make these profound teachings accessible to all. Let's start today with reading. The Interactive Present. July 2002. When you try to settle into the present moment, sometimes you find sticks, rocks, and thorns. They can be either in the body or in the mind, and you have to do your best to deal with them. It would be nice if you could simply follow some easy step-by-step instructions. 1, 2, 3, 4. First you do this and then you do that, and then the results come without your having to figure anything out on your own. And sometimes there are instructions like that in meditation books, but often the mind doesn't fall in line with them. Ideally, you should be able to let the mind settle down and grow calm and then deal with difficult issues, but sometimes before you can settle down, you've got to deal with some difficulties first. It's not only the case that discernment requires concentration. Concentration also requires discernment, learning how to bypass whatever issues you can bypass, and how to deal directly with the ones you have to deal with before you can get the mind to settle down. If there's rampant lust or anger in the mind, you've got to deal with it. You can't pretend it's not there. You can't shove it off into the corner, for it'll keep jumping out of the corner back at you. So you remind yourself of the drawbacks of that kind of thinking. You look to see where there's a lack of reasoning or a lack of logic in that kind of thinking. Many times that thinking simply comes at you with a lot of force, just as a belligerent person comes at you with a lot of force to make up for his lack of reason. So you look at your lust, look at your anger, look at your fears, and try to see, what are they actually saying? Sometimes you have to listen to them. If you listen really carefully, you'll see that after a while they don't make any sense. When you can see that, it's a lot easier to put them aside. When they come back at you, say, "You're not making any sense at all." Then you've got a handle on them. The same with physical pain. Sometimes when you sit down to meditate, there's pain in the body, and it has nothing to do with the meditation posture. It's simply there no matter what your posture. So you have to learn how to deal with it. Focus on other parts of the body so you get at least some sense of having a beachhead in the present moment, a place where you can stay and you're okay. Then you work from that position of strength. Once you get a sense of the breath going smoothly and comfortably, you let it expand from that spot into other parts of the body, moving through the part where there's pain and out the feet and out the hands. You begin to realize that those thorns in the present are not just a given. There has to be a part of you that's playing along with them, that's making them a problem. Once you see that, the thorns are a lot easier to deal with. Sometimes there's a pain in the body and the way you're breathing is actually maintaining it. Sometimes the problem is your fear that it's going to spread, which makes you build a little shell of tension around it, and while that shell of tension may keep the pain from spreading, it also keeps it in existence. The breath energy doesn't flow smoothly there, and that helps maintain the pain. When you catch yourself doing this, you get an interesting insight. The present moment is not just something given. You're participating in it. An element of your intention is shaping it. Then you can turn around and use the same principle with the mind. When there's lust or anger, part of it may be coming from past habit, but another part from your present participation. It's easy to understand this in the case of lust. You're enjoying it and so you want to continue it. Actually, part of the mind is enjoying it while another part is suffering. What you want to do is bring the suffering part out, give it voice, give it some space to express itself. This is especially needed in our culture. People who don't submit to their lust are said to be repressed and have all kinds of warped beasts in the basement. So the part of the mind that thrives when it's freed from lust doesn't get a chance. It gets pushed into the corner of the basement. It becomes the repressed part. But if you can ferret out the part of the mind that's really enjoying the lust and say, "Hey, wait a minute, what kind of enjoyment is this? How about that stress over there? How about that discomfort over there?" The sense of dissatisfaction that comes along with the lust, the cloudiness that comes into the mind because of the lust, how about that? You can start to highlight the part of the mind that really doesn't enjoy the lust. Then you have a better chance of dealing with the lust and working your way out from under its thumb. The same with anger. Try to find the part of the mind that's enjoying the anger. See what kind of happiness it gets from indulging in the anger. See how piddling and miserable that happiness is. That way you strengthen the part of the mind that really doesn't want to play along. The same goes with other emotions, such as fear or greed. Once you catch the part of the mind that's enjoying it, participating, keeping it going right now, learn to undercut it. Learn how to emphasize the part that doesn't want to play along. Then you can start applying the same principle to positive mind states, the ones that you're trying to develop. If you're conscious of the part of the mind that doesn't want to stay with the breath, try to find the part of the mind that does, that really appreciates having a chance to settle down and let go of its burdens. The potential is there, simply that it's not emphasized. So learn to give yourself pep talks. People who get easily discouraged are the ones who haven't learned that talent. You have to learn how to give yourself encouragement. See? You did that. You brought the mind back. See if you can do it again the next time. See if you can do it faster. That's the kind of encouragement you need, the kind that keeps you participating in getting states of concentration going. After all, if the present isn't just a given, why don't you learn how to shape a good present? Emphasize the positive things, so they really do get stronger. That way you find that you're less and less a victim of events. You come to play a stronger, more positive role in shaping your experience of the present. We talk many times about how ultimately you want to discontinue that participation in the present so that you can open up to the deathless. But before you do that, you've got to get skillful in how you participate in the present moment. You can't skip straight from unskillful participation to the ultimate skill of learning how to open up to the deathless. You've got to go through all of the stages of learning how to make the present a more positive experience through the way you breathe, the way you focus on the breath, the way you deal with the various states, positive or negative, that come up in the mind. You've got to learn how to be a better manager of the present moment before you can develop the even more refined skills of learning how to take all of this participation apart. So when you sit down to meditate, you've got to realize that not everything is a given. You're participating right now. What kind of participation do you want to develop? What kind of participation do you want to discontinue, to drop? These pains, the stones and thorns and all the other things that make it hard to settle down, they're not just a given. Your element of participation helps create the stones, helps sharpen the thorns. If you can catch yourself doing that and can unlearn the habit, you find it a lot easier to settle down and stay settled. You can see more clearly what's going on, and your skill in dealing with the present gets more and more refined. Imagine. April 20, 2003. Psychologists have done studies of people who have mastered skills, trying to figure out why some people are simply very good at a particular skill, while other people really master it. One of their discoveries is that for people to really master a skill, it has to capture their imagination. They like to think about it. They like to try different ways of conceptualizing the skill, approaching the skill, applying the skill in unusual and unexpected ways. And although we often don't think of imagination as being involved in meditation, in fact, we think that meditation is anti-imagination. Actually, that's not the case. To master concentration, it has to capture your imagination, just as with any other skill. When you practice concentration, what are you doing? You're creating a state in the mind that requires imagination. The Noble Eightfold Path as a whole is something fabricated, something put together. It brings you into the present, but when you get into the present, you discover how much input your intentions have in each present moment. The practice of the path is designed to make you more and more sensitive to that fact. To see how you put things together, how you can put things together in a way that creates suffering. Or how you can get more skillful at putting things together in a way that creates less and less suffering, until finally you reach a point where the whole thing gets taken apart, and there's no suffering left. But to get to that last point you have to understand what you're doing. You can't simply make up your mind that you're going to be totally uninvolved in the present moment, and simply be an observer without participating, because what happens is that your participation goes underground. You don't see it, but it's still there. So, instead, you have to be very open about the fact that you're shaping the present moment simply by choosing what you focus on. That's a decision right there. The sensations you choose to focus on, and the way you focus on them, are going to shape your experience of the present moment. You're creating a state of becoming. The Pali word here is bhava, and although one of the things we're trying to learn to overcome is the process of becoming, we can't simply drop the process. We have to understand it before we can let it go. We have to understand it to the point of dispassion and then let go. To do that, we have to keep creating more and more and more of these states, but we have to create a type of state that's comfortable to stay with, easy to analyze, easy to take apart, which is why we practice concentration. A senior monk in Bangkok once asked Ajahn Lee, "When you're practicing concentration, aren't you creating states of becoming in the mind?" And Ajahn Lee responded, "Yes, that's precisely what you're doing." He went on to say that you can't take the process apart until you can do it really well. He said, "It's like having a hen that lays eggs. You use some of the eggs to eat, while the others you crack open and take apart." In other words, part of the role of concentration is to keep the mind nourished on the path. The other part is to give you something to take apart, while at the same time putting the mind in a position where it can take these present states apart. So when you're conscious of that fact, look at the way you put the present moment together. You have choices, you know. Different things you can focus on, different ways you can focus on them. If you focus on the breath, you discover that there are many different ways of conceiving and monitoring the breath. Your way of labeling the breath sensations, the way you decide when an in-breath is long enough, when it's too long, when it's too short. A lot of these decisions get put on automatic pilot, but as you're meditating, you have a chance to examine them. You can look at them carefully and adjust them to see if there are more skillful ways of deciding how long a good long in-breath is, what signs indicate that the breath is just long enough. The same holds true with the out-breaths, the depth, the rhythm, the texture of the breath. There's a lot to play with here, and the word play is important because you've got to enjoy the process. Otherwise there's no enthusiasm for the meditation, you simply go through the motions because it's time to meditate. And when there's no enthusiasm, no joy in the process, you have a hard time sticking with it. The mind is going to lose interest, get bored and try to find something else to think about, something else to fill up the hour. And what you end up doing is filling up the hour with filler straw, shredded paper, and styrofoam peanuts, things that are not nearly as helpful as learning about the breath. The reason we're here is not just to put in time. We're here to see how the mind is creating unnecessary suffering for itself, and to learn how to stop doing it. One helpful way of understanding the process is to look at the way psychologists have analyzed imagination. They've discovered that it involves 4 skills. The first is being able to generate an image in the mind, simply giving rise to an image of one kind or another. The second is to maintain the image. The third is to inspect it, look at its details, explore some of its ramifications. And then the fourth ability is to alter the image, making changes and then inspecting it again to see what happens as you alter it. And although the psychologists who discovered these 4 skills were concerned primarily with mental pictures in the mind, you'll discover that any kind of creative work, writing, creating a tune, whatever, involves these same 4 steps. When you compare the 4 steps to concentration, you find that they apply here as well. In fact, they correspond to the 4 bases of success: desire, persistence, intentness, and ingenuity. In terms of concentration, the first step corresponds to giving rise to a nice pleasant state right here in the present moment. Can you do that? If you want to, you can. As the Buddha said, all phenomena are rooted in desire. So how are you going to use desire to give rise to that pleasant state? You can adjust the breath. You can adjust your focus. Breathe in such a way that gives rise to a pleasant feeling in at least one part of the body. Then the next step, once you've learned how to generate that state, is to maintain it, keep it going. And you'll discover that you need mindfulness, alertness, steadiness to do that. Sometimes you find it's like surfing. The wave changes beneath you, but you learn to keep your balance. In other words, the needs of the body will change, but you can keep that pleasant sensation going in spite of those changes. When you first sit down, the body may need a fairly heavy rate of breathing in order to feel comfortable, but then as it feels more comfortable, the body's needs will change. And so you have to learn how to ride that change in the wave. Adjust the rate of breathing so that it's just right for the body right now, right now, right now. This makes you more and more sensitive to the fact that the body's needs change, but you can learn how to maintain a particular balance as you get more and more sensitive in responding to those needs, in giving the body the kind of breathing it wants. Of course, the body's not going to sit there saying, "I want this, I want that," but you get more and more sensitive to the signs, the sensations that tell you that certain parts of the body are starved of breath energy, and you can consciously breathe into them. The third step is inspection. You look at the state you have in the body. Are there places where it's still uncomfortable, places where it still feels tense, where it feels tight? Well, you can think of ways to change the breath. That's the fourth step. The third and fourth steps play off each other in this way. Once you change things, you inspect them again to see if the change has made any improvement, or if it's made things worse. If it's made things worse, you can try another change. Keep inspecting, keep adjusting. In Pali this is called vicara, or evaluation. And as things get more and more comfortable, you find that the range of comfort you've been able to create for yourself begins to expand. You can breathe in with a sense that the breath energy in the body is connected in all its parts. You breathe out and the energy feels connected. Your awareness keeps filling the body, saturating the body. After a while you get to a point where you really can't improve the breath any further. It's just right as it is. As Ajahn Fuang once said, it's like pouring water into a water jar. You finally reach the point where you fill the jar and no matter how much water you try to add after that, you can't get it any fuller than that. So you stop adding water. The same with the breath. When you reach the point of fullness, you stop making so many adjustments, so many changes. You can just be with the breathing. From this point on, it's more a question of how the mind relates to the breath, whether it feels that it's separate from the breath and watching it, or whether it's more immersed in the breathing. As it gets more immersed, the rate of breathing is going to change, not so much because you made up your mind to change it, but simply because you've changed your relationship to the breath. As you get more fully immersed in the body and breath, you develop a sturdy feeling of unification and ease. The breathing will grow more subtle to the point where it finally stops, not because you forced it to stop, but because the mind has slowed down enough to the point where it needs less and less and less oxygen. The oxygen exchange at the skin is enough to keep the body going, so that it doesn't have to keep pumping in, pumping out. Ajahn Lee compares this state to an ice cube with vapor coming off of it. The body feels very still, but around the edges there's a kind of effortless vapor that you feel with the in and out breathing. Then after a while even that stops and everything is perfectly still. All of this comes from creating that spot in the body where it feels good to stay focused. Then learning how to maintain it. Then inspecting it to see where you can expand it, where you can make it more stable. And then adjusting it in various ways. Using your imagination to think at least of the possibility that the breath could be more comfortable, the breath could saturate the body. You could think of all the cells of the body being bathed in the breath, whatever way you have of conceiving the breath that makes it more and more comfortable, a better and better place to stay. In this way, the four aspects of imagination apply to what you're doing right here, even though you're not trying to create a mental picture. Sometimes there will be mental pictures behind it, but you're more concerned with the actual sensation of the breath as you feel it coming in, as you feel it going out, as you play with it, as you create a sense of very intense well-being right here. Even though it's something created, something fabricated, it's a good thing to create, a good thing to fabricate. As the Buddha said, right concentration is the heart of the path. The other factors are its requisites. And for discernment to do its work of insight in the present moment, the heart of the path has to stay healthy and strong. You have to create and maintain a good solid basis through concentration. So because it's a created state, you have to be creative about it, imaginative about it. And you find that the more your imagination opens up to the possibilities already present, the more new possibilities your imagination opens up. As long as you're frank about the process, that you're creating this state, you don't have to worry about getting attached to it, even though you probably will get attached to it, because deep down inside you know it's something you've created, and eventually you'll have to take it apart. But in the meantime, learn how to do it well. The more solid the concentration, the more you want to stay here. The more you stay here, the more familiar you get with the territory. And it's through that familiarity that the practice of concentration turns into the practice of insight, the kind of insight that can liberate you. Without this stability and familiarity, your insights are simply ideas you've heard from Dhamma talks, read in books, notions you've picked up from outside. They don't seep deep into the mind because the mind hasn't softened up the territory here in the present moment. Only through the practice of concentration can the hardness in the present moment begin to soften up and give the insights a chance to seep deeper and deeper. So when you have this kind of understanding about what you're doing, you find it a lot easier to go about it. And you begin to realize it's not a mechanical process. It's a creative process. That way it can capture your imagination. When it captures your imagination, you get more interested in what you can do with the breath, not just when you're sitting here with your eyes closed, but any time of the day. How you deal with the breath, how you get centered in the breath can help you deal with anger. It makes you more sensitive to what anger does to the body, and you can breathe through the physical manifestations of the anger, so that you don't feel like they've taken over. When there's fear, you can try using the breath to deal with fear. Get in touch with the physical side of the fear and breathe right through it. Notice how the breath can help deal with boredom, how it can help deal with illness, how it can help deal with pain. There's a lot to explore here. And as the possibilities of the breath capture your imagination, you find that this skill is useful, not only when you're trying to sit with your eyes closed, but also wherever the present may be, wherever you may be in the present. Whatever the context, whatever the situation, you find that the breath has something to offer if you explore it. And to explore it, you have to get a sense that it can capture your imagination. It gives you that kind of challenge, along with the sense of reward that comes when you've explored something and discovered something new, a valuable skill. This is how meditation can start permeating your whole life. When it permeates your whole life, when you're more and more familiar with it, that's when the insights arise. Unexpected insights sometimes, insights that you won't always find in the books, but very personal, very much relevant to how you relate to events in the body and mind. And you realize that they've come to you because you've opened up your imagination to what's possible with the raw materials of the present. 29. In the mood. November 23, 2002. Ajahn Suwat often recommended putting yourself in a good mood each time before you meditate. This may sound a little backwards for many of us because we meditate in order to put ourselves in a good mood, and yet he says to start out with a good mood. But when you stop to think about it, there's really no way you can get good results out of the meditation unless the mind has at least some good qualities in it, some cheerfulness, some patience, some wisdom. These are qualities that act as seeds that allow the meditation to develop. We're not totally empty-handed when we come to the meditation. We do have good qualities in the mind, and there are plenty of things we can think about to put the mind in a good mood. This is why we have the chant on goodwill to start out the meditation each and every time. Goodwill is a good thing to think about. You look at yourself spreading thoughts of goodwill and you feel good about yourself. You're not totally selfish, not totally angry, vindictive, whatever. There's at least some goodness inside you. You take that as your starting capital. As with any investment, you need to have something to begin with. If you don't have money, at least you've got strength, or you've got your intelligence. You take whatever good things you've got and you invest them. That's how they grow. So when we sit here to meditate, we do our best to make the mind patient, to lift it above its ordinary cares and concerns of the day, and then bring it to the meditation object. That way you can relate to the breath, or whatever your object, in a friendly way. Being in a good mood puts the breath in good shape as well. If you feel frustrated about your breathing or frustrated about your meditation, that's going to do funny things to your breath, make it harder and harder to stay with the breath. So think in whatever way helps the mind get ready to meditate, in the mood to meditate. This is part of the first basis of success. Chanda, the desire to meditate. You want to meditate. You feel an inclination, an attraction to the meditation. If you sit down and you feel yourself totally disinclined to meditate, don't just force yourself to do it. Remind yourself of the good reasons for why you're doing it. Think of ways to make it interesting, ways to make it entertaining. You can do all kinds of things with the breath. Look at Ajahn Lee's Dhamma talks. When he defines the different levels of breathing in the body, he hardly ever repeats himself. There's always something new, something different that he's found from his meditation. We don't have to memorize all his ways of analyzing the breath. We should give them a try, of course, but we should also look at our ways of analyzing the breath energy and see what works for us. When you feel depressed, what kind of breathing feels uplifting and energizing? When you feel manic, what kind of breathing feels grounding? When you feel lazy, what kind of breathing energizes you? When you feel tense, what kind of breathing relaxes you? There's a lot to explore, and in the exploration you get absorbed in the breath without even thinking about forcing yourself or holding a whip over the mind. This way the mind can be on good terms with the breath can be good, and it's easier and easier to settle down. So always take stock of your mind before you meditate, to see what kind of shape it's in. Don't let thoughts of frustration or discouragement take charge of the mind. The Dalai Lama once said the thing he found most surprising about Westerners was their self-hatred. In Tibet, he said, only the village idiots feel self-hatred. Of course, he said that smiling, but it's a pretty harsh judgment. And it's also true, I noticed, in Thailand. Perhaps not so much anymore. As modern culture moves in, it really does teach people to hate themselves, to feel bad about themselves. It holds up all sorts of images of physical and financial perfection that nobody can live up to. But in traditional culture, one of the basic skills of being a human being was, essentially, how to feel good about yourself, how to love yourself, how to wish yourself well, and how to act intelligently on that wish. Only really stupid people would hate themselves, and yet that kind of stupidity is rampant now in the modern world. Be careful not to pick it up. The mind has the potential for all kinds of moods. Sometimes simply sitting and taking stock of things for a few minutes, learning how to use our powers of thought not to destroy ourselves as many of us do, but as an assistance to the meditation can make all the difference. We often think that to meditate is to stop thinking. Well, you have to learn how to think properly before your thoughts can stop in a skillful way. If you're thinking in ways that are self-destructive, in ways that are really harmful to yourself, and you simply stop, it's like running a truck into a wall. You can get thrown through the windshield or suffer whiplash. But if you learn how to think in ways that are for your own true benefit, like the things we chant about every evening, which are always beneficial to think about, then when the time comes for the mind to settle down and think less and less and less, and get more and more absorbed in the present moment, it's a lot easier. There's a natural deceleration. So the way you prepare yourself to meditate, the attitudes you bring to the meditation, are very important. This doesn't mean that you should meditate only when you're in a good mood. If you're in a bad mood, think in ways that will improve your mood, that will improve your attitude toward the meditation, your attitude toward the object that you're going to be focusing on. Remind yourself that the breath is your friend, and you're here to develop the friendship even further. In that way, your thinking, instead of being a distraction, is actually a component part of the meditation. It's an important step that can't be overlooked. The Storytelling Mind. June 2001. We've all read how the practice of meditation can dismantle our sense of self as we take a good hard look at the things we identify as me or mine. When you meditate, you're supposed to come into the present moment and drop all reference to the future or the past, and simply look at things as they arise. But some futures and pasts are easier to drop than others. Even if you can drop them for the time you're in meditation, you've got to come back and live with them when you come out of meditation. This whole issue of the narratives of our lives, the stories we tell ourselves. If we could just drop them and be done with them, life would be awfully easy. Meditation would be easy. But some narratives are stickier than others. We know that the Buddha's teachings involve learning to drop a lot of things, but in some cases, before you can drop them, you have to learn how to do them skillfully. The stories you tell yourself about your life are among the things you have to learn how to do skillfully. Otherwise, you can come out of a nice peaceful meditation and meet up with the same old rotten story all over again. You'll find yourself relating to it and getting tied up in it again and again and again. Or else you find that you can't even get into the meditation to begin with, because no matter how hard you try to drop the story, it stays stuck to your hand. So a good part of the meditation is often not just being with the breath, but if you find you've got a story that keeps obsessing the mind, stirring up greed, anger, delusion, fear, whatever, learning how to deal with that story, learning how to tell yourself new stories. Learn a corrective to the old stories. One of the basic ways of doing this is to reflect on the passage we chanted just now, developing thoughts of goodwill, compassion, appreciation, and equanimity. Try to develop these attitudes with respect to those stories so that you can tell yourself new stories that are easier to let go of in a liberating way. In other words, you don't just push the stories away. You weave a new story, and then you get to the point in the story where it's time to settle down and meditate. That way the story will leave you alone. When you come back out of meditation, the story may still be there, but it's not the kind of story that's going to get you all worked up. It's been refashioned. Learn to get more and more skillful at the way you tell stories in the mind, starting out with an attitude of goodwill. First, goodwill for yourself. You realize that if you sit here telling yourself bad stories over and over again, you're going to suffer. Do you want to suffer? Well, no. Do you want other people to suffer? Well, maybe. You may think about people who have wronged you and of how much you'd like to see them get their just desserts. In cases like this, you have to ask yourself what you're going to gain from their suffering. You don't benefit in any way from their suffering. The fact that you're sitting there wishing suffering on them is harming you right now, getting in the way of your meditation. So what you want is a story for yourself that ends up with your being happy and their being happy. That's your wish. That's the basic foundation for all the rest of the sublime attitudes. Now in some cases you see where people are actually harming themselves, harming you, harming others. That's where you need compassion. Think about it. You really wish they could stop. And of course the same thing applies to you. When you're harming yourself, you wish you could stop causing that harm. It would be good for that harm not to happen. It would be good for those people not to suffer. Remind yourself of that attitude. For appreciation, you remind yourself of your goodness, of the goodness of other people, the things you've done that make you deserve to be happy, the things that other people have done that make them deserve to be happy. You're not jealous or resentful of their happiness, and you don't downplay their good points. Finally, equanimity, when you realize that some things are simply beyond your control. No matter how much goodwill you feel for other people, No matter how much appreciation and compassion you feel, some things lie totally beyond what you can change. Number 1, the past cannot be changed. You have to develop equanimity toward the past. Look at what the Buddha has you think about to develop equanimity. The principle of karma. Old karma is old karma and cannot be undone. What's important is your new karma, what you're doing right now. Now, that can affect some things, but there are other things beyond the power of new karma, largely through the continuance of old karma. You've got to think about that and learn how to develop equanimity in cases where equanimity is appropriate. The Buddha isn't saying that equanimity is better than the other 3 attitudes. You just learn which situations require which attitude. Which situations require goodwill, which require compassion, which require appreciation, which require equanimity. In this way, equanimity is not simply passive acceptance. It's an ordering of your priorities, telling you to stop wasting energy on things that can't be changed, and to focus it instead on areas where goodwill, compassion, and appreciation can make a difference. So you look at the stories you're telling yourself and try to inject them with these attitudes, and especially the teaching on karma. There's no wrong that goes unpunished, no good that goes unrewarded. That's simply the way karma is. Therefore, we don't have to carry around ledger sheets which person did this, which person did that, with the fear that if the ledger sheet disappears, then that person's not going to get the retribution he or she deserves. The principle of karma takes care of that. But remember that it also takes care of you as well. When you look at the satisfaction you get out of unskillful storytelling, you realize that it's pretty miserable. It's nothing you really want. It's nothing that stands up to any real scrutiny. When you see this, you find it easier to let go. You've got these other attitudes that will bring you into the present moment in a way that allows you to feel good about yourself. You're not allowing yourself to be victimized. At the same time, you're not wishing ill on anybody. You do what can be done given the situation. And when the time comes where the mind needs a rest, the mind needs to settle down, that's what should be done right now. That's the best thing you can do right now. And that way the narrative leads you into the present moment. You want to look at the attitudes you're fostering in your mind and make sure they're skillful ones, because the whole issue of karma boils down to this. What you do right now is important. What was done in the past may have some influence on what you can do right now, but what you do right now is what's really important. And the possibility of doing something skillful right now is always present. When bad things come, you accept them as the results of past karma, but if you realize you're doing bad karma in the present as well, that's something you can't have equanimity for. You've got to change it. You can do your best in whatever the situation is, confident that it will work out, that if you keep on doing and saying and thinking skillful things, the results will have to be good. So no matter how bad the situation, your hope lies in what you're doing right now. And the more you think about this, the more it brings the mind into the present moment. That's when it's ready to meditate. If you look in the texts where the Buddha talks about the past, some of them go back many eons, many cycles of the universe, describing how this happened, how that happened, where this came from, where that came from. Long stories about past lives or cycles of lives. But these texts all end up by pointing to the basic principle that has shaped these things and is going to shape the future. The principle of karma. And where's karma being made? Right here, right now. So focus right here. The same with all the cosmologies. When the Buddha describes the levels of being, the discussion comes down to where these levels of being come from. They come from the mind, from what the mind is doing in the present. Right here, right now. Whatever the narratives are, when you tell them skillfully, they bring you back to the present moment. So learn how to be a good storyteller, telling yourself the right stories, stories that will bring you into the present with a sense of confidence in your own abilities, with a sense of well-being, a sense of the importance of stilling the mind. No matter what the stories are, no matter what other people have done, no matter what you've done, there's a way of looking at them that can put the mind at rest. To try to find that way, This is what all the teachings on Kamma, all the teachings on the sublime attitudes, are about. You weave new stories in the mind, stories in which you have a change of heart, new stories that come together right here, enabling you to stay right here with a sense of well-being, clarity, concentration, mindfulness, and discernment. Without anything tugging you back into the past, pulling you into the future, you're able to just be right here, right now, aware right here, right now, healing the mind right here, right now. That's how you use the mind storytelling ability to bring it to a point where it can just stop telling stories and look at what you've got. Learn to be skillful with what you've got right here, right now. That's what the Buddha's teachings all come down to, this principle of skillfulness. How skillfully can you relate to the different things going on in your mind, for your own well-being, for the well-being of others around you? Meditation doesn't mean that you're cutting off any mental faculties. The mind has to tell stories. Even arahants can tell stories, can reflect on the past and plan for the future. They've simply learned to do it in a way that doesn't cause any suffering. And it's not just from their bringing the mind into the present moment. It also comes from reflecting on things in a certain way, using the Buddha's teachings as proper tools to weave skillful narratives. Let all the ways that the mind relates to itself in terms of past, future, narratives, stories, worldviews, cosmologies, all your views become skillful. Let them no longer be a cause for suffering. Think of the practice as an all-around way of training the mind. You're not here just to get very skillful at noting or at being with the breath. You want the mind to become very skillful in all its activities. Ajahn Fuang once said to me, when I went back to reordain, that being a meditator requires being skillful in everything, not just sitting here with your eyes closed. You approach everything as an interesting challenge. What's the most skillful way of dealing with this? What's the most skillful way of dealing with that? When you have that attitude, when you've developed it and trained it in your daily life, then when you come to the meditation, things go a lot easier. 37. How to Fall. December 2002. A frequent question is, how can you tell if you're making progress in your meditation? And one of the answers is, when the mind slips off its object, you get faster and faster at bringing it back. Notice, the answer isn't, the mind doesn't slip off at all. You're expected to slip off. It's a normal part of the practice, a normal part of the training. The point lies in being more alert to what's going on and quicker to remedy the situation when you've slipped off the breath. So an important part of learning how to meditate is learning how to fall. They say that when you start learning Aikido, the first thing they teach is how to fall without hurting yourself. The purpose is that it makes you less and less afraid to fall, less and less damaged, of course, by the fall, and also less likely to fall, more willing to take chances. So the trick when you meditate is learning how to bring the mind back with a minimum amount of recrimination, a minimum amount of self-criticism, with just the simple observation, I haven't come here to think about next week's schedule or last night's fiascos or whatever. I'm here to focus on the breath. Simply leave those other things and come back. Learn how to do it without tying your mind up in knots. In our modern educational system, we're quickly channeled into the activities where we have a natural talent. As a result, we don't learn how to become good at things that don't come easily. So when we make an effort at something that doesn't come naturally, the easiest thing in the world seems to be to slip and fall, and then just go with the fall and plop down, fallen. That's called not knowing how to fall. The trick, when you fall, is to notice that there is a certain amount of momentum, but you don't have to give in to the momentum. You can notice this when you've made a vow to give up something for a particular period of time. Last summer it was popular here at the monastery to give up chocolate in the evening. But then came the temptation. What's wrong with a little bit of chocolate? Well, there's nothing really wrong with chocolate per se, so it was easy to rationalize and come to the decision to drop the vow, to go for the chocolate. The problem, of course, is that the important part of the vow wasn't the chocolate, it was the training and sticking to your vow no matter what. All too often we assume that once that decision to drop a vow has been made, it can't be unmade, you're powerless and have to follow through with the momentum. But it is possible to unmake that decision in the next moment or 2 moments later, 3 moments later. This is called learning how to fall properly. In other words, you don't give in to the momentum that leads you away. You realize that you're always free to change your mind immediately and come back. When you notice yourself slipping off the breath, don't just give in to the momentum of having slipped. Catch yourself. I can just turn around, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you can turn around. Now, the mind may come up with other reasons. Oh no, you can't turn around now, you've committed yourself. Well, that's interesting. You've suddenly committed yourself to the distraction which isn't committed to you, and you don't feel you've committed yourself to your meditation. This is one of the many tricks the mind plays on itself. The important point is learning how to see through those tricks, not to believe them, and to have a few tricks of your own. There's a part of the mind that says it's a lot more natural to take the easy way out, but that begs the question of nature versus nurture. If you go to a psychotherapist, you learn very clearly how your particular habits got developed by a particular way your parents raised you, or by particular experiences you had when you were a kid. That means those habits are not necessarily natural. They were learned. They're there, they're ingrained, but you can unlearn them. You can nurture the mind in the other direction, which is what we're doing as we train it in meditation. We're re-educating the mind. And not only are we teaching it how to stay on one topic as we stay with the breath, but we're also teaching it how to come back to the breath more quickly. How to catch yourself as the mind begins to let go of the breath and latch on to something else, and to just turn right around, without any problem at all, and latch back onto the breath. This way you learn to discipline yourself without the harshness that we usually associate with the word discipline. We're learning a more matter-of-fact way of dealing with our own mind. You find that this cuts through a lot of the garbage. And as a result, there are fewer hooks for your defilements to hang on to. Instead of dealing with abstractions such as my personality, my character, the way I am, just keep focused on the present moment. Whatever decision was made, it was made in total freedom, and if you see it's a bad decision, you have total freedom to make another decision. When you clear away your self-image, which is another hiding ground for all kinds of defilements, the playing field is a lot clearer, and there are a lot fewer places for the defilements to hide. A woman I know in Laguna Beach once went to a meditation retreat, where she was taught to bring meditation practice into daily life, by viewing daily life as an interplay between the absolute and the relative. Those are pretty big abstractions, about as big as you can get. And after trying to think in these terms for a week, she came to the Sunday sitting group with a very convoluted question about how to manage her life in those terms. I must admit the question was so convoluted that I couldn't follow it, but the problem was obvious. The more abstract the abstraction, the more difficult it is to see your way clearly in the path, and the easier it is to get tied up in knots. We tend to think of abstractions as being clean and neat and Mondrian, but actually they leave room for lots of convolutions. They place lots of veils over what's really happening. When you clear away the abstractions, you have the mind right here with the breath. It can decide to stay with the breath or it can decide to move away. It's as simple as that. The same principle applies throughout the practice. Once you've made up your mind to stick with the precepts, you keep deciding with every moment whether you're going to stick with that vow. Once you've made up your mind to stick with the breath, you keep deciding with every moment whether you're going to stick with that intention. And the more you keep things on simple terms, basic terms, down to earth, no nonsense, straight talking terms in the mind without bringing in issues about your past, without bringing in issues about your self-image to complicate matters, you find it's a lot easier to stay on the path. It's a lot easier to bring yourself back when you fall off, because there are fewer convolutions in the terrain you're falling on. So not only when you're meditating, but also when you're practicing every aspect of the path, try to keep things as simple as possible, as down to earth, moment to moment as possible. When I was staying with Ajahn Fuang, He would sometimes ask me to do things like, "Tonight sit up and meditate all night long." "Oh my gosh," I responded the first time he said that, "I can't do that. I didn't get enough sleep last night and had a long tiring day." And so on. And he said, "Is it going to kill you?" "Well, no." "Then you can do it." As simple as that. Of course, it wasn't easy, but it was simple. And when you keep things simple, they eventually do become easier. You just stay with that moment-to-moment decision, not thinking about, all night, I've got to keep this up all night. You just think about, this breath, this breath, this breath. Find ways to keep yourself interested in each breath as it comes, and you make it to morning. That's how you bring the meditation into daily life. Keep things simple, strip them down. Once things are stripped down in the mind, the defilements don't have many places to hide. And when you do fall, you fall in a place that's easier to get up from. You don't have to give in to the momentum of the fall or get stuck in a quagmire. You catch yourself and regain your balance right away. My mother once said that the event that first attracted her to my father happened during a meal at her home. My uncle, her brother, had invited my dad home from college for a visit. Then one day, during a meal, my dad knocked a glass of milk off the table, but he caught the glass before it hit the floor. And that's why my mother married him. I know it sounds kind of crazy. I owe my existence to my father's quick reflexes, but it says something very interesting. And it's the kind of quality you want as a meditator. If you knock yourself over, well, you can pick yourself right back up. If you can do it before you hit the floor, so much the better. But even when you're flat on the floor, you're not a glass. You haven't shattered. You can still pick yourself up. Try to keep it as simple as that. This is the end of this episode. We will be seeing on the next episode. In harmony with the Buddha's guidance, we underscore the immense value of disseminating wisdom on a grand scale. Presently, we've converted this extensive 1,000-page tome into an easily accessible audio format. The time has come for you to contribute to this noble mission. Your participation, through subscribing, liking, and sharing this content, holds substantial significance in proliferating these teachings for the benefit of all. Together, let's carry forward the time-honored tradition of spreading knowledge and mindfulness, fostering the betterment of humanity. Your involvement in this shared endeavor has the potential to make a profound impact on the lives of countless individuals.